Good morning, everybody. We'll continue our study in the divided kingdom this morning. As you can see on this slide right here, other than maybe a few backup verses, pretty much we're studying from a little bit of Isaiah, which of course we had a whole week of that, doing the whole book in the last week, but a little bit in Isaiah chapter 7, a couple of verses from chapter 9, mostly the first 9 verses of 2 Kings chapter 16, although we'll reference back to a little bit of 15, and then also 2 Chronicles 28, doing the first 21 verses or so there. And the lesson from this morning and crossing over to next Sunday's lesson will kind of still be in these chapters here of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles, but moving on the end of 2 Chronicles and picking up where we leave off today. But today's main character is Ahaz, and as we'll see in a minute, not a very good guy. We'll be talking about him and his influence with what's going on with everything that we've been saying recently in several weeks and the job that he's doing as a leader. And we'll also be continuing to talk about Assyria's influence on the region and Tiglath-Pileser and everything that's going on with his campaign. And then moving on to next week, we'll be getting into Hezekiah coming in. But let's just keep in mind that as we discuss this period of time that we're getting closer to the end of the northern kingdom and relatively not too far off from the end of the southern kingdom, and all because of the sin of the people and they're turning their backs on God. So let's go over a few points on the timeline a little bit before, during, and after Ahaz right here. We've already discussed what you see in those first couple of bullets. We discussed a few weeks ago Menahem and the northern kingdom had given Tiglath-Pileser, also known as Pul, money to go away and to not take them over at the time. So we introduced this a couple of classes ago. You can reference back into chapter 15 of 2 Kings for that. You remember how we've been talking about the prophets and how the wealthy people were, really taking advantage of the poor and lying and cheating their way to make more money and all that, and God's just pretty much had enough of it. But going back, you have this king of Israel at the time that tried already, as Assyria is regaining a lot of strength, he's trying to get them to go away, and he tries to pay them off. And as we see in the story today and in the upcoming weeks, that long-term plan's not going to work out, because one of the lessons we need to get out of all this is they were not relying on God to help them. They weren't seeking after God to help them. They were seeking for other people. So they go to a pagan king to ask for help instead of going to God for help. Then, as we've been talking about also in Israel during Pekah's reign, we've been talking about Tiglath-Pileser's further conquest into the land during his reign. We had talked about back in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, where he took the land east of the Jordan and kind of took over that area. And we also introduced, and we'll mention this a little bit later today too, but how he attacked and took over a lot of the land in the northern part of the northern kingdom. Mentioned Galilee, Naphtali, and how he carried many away to Assyria at that time too. So that's also reverting a little bit back into chapter 15. So just keep in the back of your minds that captivity is beginning, and here we haven't had it fully come to fruition yet, where the country's totally annihilated yet. But you remember that map where it showed since the days of Jeroboam the second, in the days of Jeroboam the second, and also King Uzziah in the south, how the borders had expanded, and we were like, there were still a lot of evil going on in the land. That's what the prophets were talking about, but they had really expanded the borders. Well, all that's in the past now, and you can slowly start just seeing everything shrinking down in the north, shrinking down around Samaria. In the south, as we go through this lesson and further, it's starting to shrink down a little bit from areas they had captured. They start losing some of those. So that's a little background of kind of what's going on right now. So he becomes the king in the 17th year of Pekah's reign, talking about Ahaz and the southern kingdom of Judah. And, we're getting close to the fall of the northern kingdom at this time. And as I have on a chart in a moment, Hoshea is going to be the last king that we read about till they're totally wiped out. And so we're getting down to the very end here. A couple of notes about the chronology. If you study the Waldron book very much, and I know most of you that studied through this time period a lot of times, it gets really confusing. You have similar named kings on both kingdoms at the same time. That's very hard to keep up with. Are we talking about Israel or Judah? Then if you really start noticing some of the language between 2 Kings and then going over to the book of Chronicles, and you're like, I'm having trouble finding exactly how the timeline lines up. And a lot of those problems, as I have in the middle of this slide here, had to do with these co-regent kings. Uzziah is an easier one to look at because of his leprosy. It makes sense that he couldn't rule anymore because he had to be away from the people. So his son was ruling at that time. But there's all sorts of other things going on. And another point is that in Israel, a lot of people, and I think Mr. Waldron had this in his book too, speculated that Pekah's reign actually wasn't, a total reign over all of Israel. There was a lot of fighting going on between, like when Menahem was ruling and Pekahiah before Pekah kills him. There's it might have been some rulings going on where some of them are ruling part of the region of the country until the other one ends up defeating them or killing them off or whatever. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. And what we decided we're not going to do in this series of surveys is to spend a whole lot of time about that. So don't get lost in the exact years on any of these. But there are a lot of timelines and books written on it, and you can go spend time digging deeper, but we're not going to do that in this class. As I said here, I don't know that you can read this very well, but what I will say is we're to Pekah, and following him, you have Hoshea, so Israel's about to come to an end. If you can read any of that in the green on the right side of the screen, but you may not be able to. We're studying Ahaz, and then we're going to get into Hezekiah, Manasseh, but really we're getting to the end of the southern kingdom as well. Okay, so a lot of the main part of the study today is really about wars going on and conflict. We used to have a period of peace going on in the northern and southern kingdoms, but now the peace has gone away. And God said in the books of the prophets, we've been studying that peace is going away. And now you really have it coming to fruition here. Referencing back to 2 Kings 15:37, it said, in those days of Jotham, the Lord began to send Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, against Judah. So you start having the northern kingdom going against the southern kingdom, and you start having this kingdom of Syria, not to be confused with Assyria, but Syria. So Syria and Israel starting to come down and put pressure on Judah. So this time of peace is going away. And of course, as we were just mentioned a moment ago, Israel's already been going through great conflict already, and already having that pressure and having to pay off Assyria to leave them at least somewhat alone as long as they pay them off. So you really got a lot of conflict going on at this time right now. So not much more is said about the battles with Jotham when Jotham's the king right here, other than what's said really right there. But today's lesson mostly in 2 Kings, Isaiah, and Chronicles are going to be talking about how Ahaz is having to deal with all this conflict. But as we'll study here shortly, we'll see why there's so much conflict coming during his reign. And just kind of a thought question there, we'll move on. But can you imagine with what you know in the world today that Israel and Syria would be doing anything together? I mean, if you keep up with much in the world today, you're talking about absolute hatred between those countries. So that is the area we're talking about. But there's no coalitions with them in this day and age. All right, so if you'll have your kind of books marked, you'll have to flip a little bit, but most of it's here in 2 Kings. You may have to flip over a little bit to 2 Chronicles 28 and then Isaiah a little bit in there as well. But let's start with 2 Kings 16 and read a few verses there. It says, in the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. And he did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord his God, as his father David had done, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Indeed, he made his sons pass through the fire according to the abominations of the nations whom the Lord had cast out from before the children of Israel, and he sacrificed and burned incense on the high places, on the hills, and under every green tree. So we haven't had perfect kings in Judah very much, or close to perfect kings, or ones that God really thought had done a really good job. But we've had handfuls of them right now. But we've had nobody that was evil like this guy, at least up to this date right here. He's the most evil king in Judah to date. And really, if you look at what's said about him, he's doing things that even the northern kingdom kings, as bad as they were, he's doing things they never did. So in the back of your minds, think about if Jotham and Uzziah were good kings, the father and the grandfather of Ahaz, what happened to this guy? And there's all sorts of speculation you can get into, but what can somebody tell me, at least in your mind? And we'll go a little bit, but you have a father that did pretty well and sought after God, and your grandfather did pretty well. What happened to this guy who takes over when he's 20? Anybody have any ideas on that one? Think about what's going on with the people at the time. Even though Uzziah was good, or relatively good in doing what God wanted, other than what he had done in the temple, and even though Jotham was good relatively, what happens to this guy? What did he, the example that we can get, let's put it this way: how can influences of who we hang around affect us? Because what we'll get to in a point here, it doesn't matter where you came from and that sort of stuff. If you don't care at all, or if you're going to go your own way, you can be trained to a certain point. But if you're not going to follow the training and you want to go your own way, I believe that's kind of what happened to this guy here. So a lot of those verses there were just references talking about Jotham and Uzziah doing what God wanted them to do. Of course, the point made at the end there is the high places weren't removed. Mr. Preconia?
It seems that Ahaz was attracted to being up in Damascus, and to the point of adopting their method of worship and scrapping pretty much the method of worship from God. It says in verse 10, Ahaz went to Damascus, Tiglath-Pileser, king of Syria, saw an altar that was at Damascus. King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest the design of the altar and its pattern according to all his workmanship. So he's starting to just adopt what he thinks is really neat, regardless of how it's offensive to God and untrue.
Right. So Mr. Preconia is making a point of pretty much how Ahaz seemed to have been influenced by things he saw around him, for example, other kingdoms, and got kind of enamored with maybe some of their riches, or maybe just whatever that is, the influences of how, nice looking maybe their altar was, or, just some emotional feeling that he got from seeing that sort of stuff. But he could have been influenced, as Mr. Preconia said, by the nations around him and watching that. He could have been influenced by what we know from studying the prophets. The people were totally morally corrupt. So as he's a young person, and if you got, younger children, I got one that just graduated high school, but you start hearing, their thoughts on things sometimes. There's a reason why it takes you time to mature, because sometimes somebody that's a teenager or younger in their 20s and still trying to figure everything out, a lot of times they're influenced by what they take in their ears or see with their eyes instead of, what God's word has taught them. And I think a lot of that kind of happened here. He kind of just got selfish, and maybe at first was trying to appease a little bit of God and a little bit of this. But what we don't need to forget here is what it described of him right there. He went further than any king of Israel had even gone through before, with having his sons pass through fire and the sacrifice, and that's done. But then he got involved with the same Baal worship that we've been talking about, for almost 2 quarters in here right now, where they turn their backs on God and start worshiping wooden idols and things like that. Well, that's what he did. So now he's brought that absolute evil to Judah. And the shock factor is just a little bit that he had good parents and grandparents and stuff overall, but he totally flips when he's in charge. So the question is, do righteous parents always have righteous children? Anybody got it? Is a righteous parent always? Well, here's an example right here. That answer is no. And can an unrighteous parent still yield a righteous parent? Jumping ahead to next week, but I know we already know the answer to this just in this day and age, but Hezekiah is going to be one of the best kings ever, and Ahaz is his father, and he's one of the most evil ever. So you can't just assume that a parent or child is going to have effect on the other one, and that's because of our free will that God allows us to have, where we can decide how we're going to be. So not spending much time on this next slide here, but it's kind of cool every now and then. I think Steve likes to bring in the artifacts and that sort of stuff when he can in a lesson, so we won't spend much time on this, but this like little signet or seal that was found over time that belonged to Ahaz, and here's some of the information about that. So it's kind of neat sometimes, not that we need something to beef up the Bible. It is what it is. This is the authority, but it's kind of neat sometimes when they dig up and find artifacts that are parallel with the Bible narrative, because there's a lot of people out there that'll even say this stuff, never happened, or these people didn't exist. So let's talk a little bit more about his character as we flip over and do the first 4 verses of 2 Chronicles chapter 28. Brings up a few other phrases maybe that wasn't mentioned in 2 Kings, but in 2 Chronicles 28, 1 through 4, Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the sight of the Lord as his father David had done, all that similar. For he walked, verse 2, in the ways of the kings of Israel and made molded images for the Baals. So now he's doing what Israel did. That's what we were just saying. So now he's brought Baal worship down into the southern kingdom. And then look at verse 3. He burned incense in the valley of the son of Hinnom and burned his children in the fire according to the abominations of which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. And he sacrificed and burned incense on the hills, on the high places, hills, and under every green tree. So really verse 3 added a little bit more meat to what we just studied in 2 Chronicles. And if you have a Bible that gives a little bit more meat to the story maybe, and I'll explain a little bit more. If you don't know much about the Valley of Hinnom, or the son of Hinnom, it says it's outside the west wall of Jerusalem, and it was like an area of refuse and a dumping site and a lot of burning and nastiness. It was a really gross part of the country right there, but it also was heavily involved with pagan worship that was done outside the wall there. So you got this guy bringing Baal worship in there, acting just like the kings of Israel that were always evil, and then he one-ups them and becomes even more evil by being involved in even more stuff that hasn't been done since the people were driven out of the land of Canaan back in the days of Joshua. This guy is just, however it happened, pure evil. So looking at some of those points, we won't read this, but he seems to be very zealous, very active, just passionate about his false worship. But just like Romans is saying about Israel, it's not exactly an exact comparison, because they were followers or saw only God as the true God, but they were doing their own worship. This guy is bringing all that stuff back in that God just absolutely hates, but he's doing it not necessarily out of pure ignorance, but doing it with no truth, just doing it foolishly, thinking that, that there is some power with some of these other nations' gods and that sort of thing. But he was very passionate about it, but he had no passion towards serving the Lord. So again, his heart was false. What can we learn from this story? We may not be kings or maybe not living, 2,500 years or so ago, but what we can get out of this in this day and age is how God felt about worshiping idols and putting other things ahead of him, or turning our backs on him. That's kind of what this story means to us. So he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and even took part in these abominations. So that reminded me of Proverbs chapter 6, that's talking about the 6 things the Lord's hate. It says in Proverbs 6 things the Lord's hate, hates. Yes, 7 are an abomination to him: a proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift to running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. There's a description of Ahaz. There's really a description of the people, almost all of them in the northern and southern kingdoms at this time. They have become abominations to God because everything they're doing is all about sin and doing what they want and being selfish. So again, think about not only the Baal worship, but all these things that he went even further, going all the way back to the times of Joshua and this evil that God had driven out of Canaan. He's bringing all of that back in. Okay. So a little bit of background behind the wars going on here, or that's about to be going on. It seems like Syria and Israel were trying to create a coalition of Judah. You get kind of that out of Isaiah as well, but it seems like they wanted, what's their big beef? What is Syria and Israel's beef with Judah? They wanted them to join in to kind of fight against Assyria, and it looks like because the advice of Isaiah that, they didn't do so. And so Israel and Syria attacked Judah. That's kind of the background of what's going on there. And we'll read a little bit this in a minute, but it looks like Syria and Israel, because of Ahaz's refusal to help them, wanted to put their own king on the throne in there and kill him off to fight against Assyria. So now let's quickly flip over to Isaiah chapter 7. And let's see, we'll read a little bit there real quick. Isaiah chapter 7, that gives some of this feedback going on here, a little more meat of what's going on between these three nations. Chapter 7, now it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail against this. And I want you to hold this in the back of your mind, because there's no success right here. But they're going to have great success against them later, and it's going to be because Ahaz. But right off the bat, Ahaz is given a chance by God to ward off these other countries by serving God. But let's continue. But initially, they had no success, talking about Syria and Israel. Verse 2, and it was told in the house of David, saying, Syria's forces are deployed in Ephraim, talking about Israel. So his heart and the heart of his people were moved as the trees of the woods and are moved with the wind. So you start having Ahaz shaking in his boots, knowing what's coming at him. Verse 3, then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now to meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub, your son, at the end of the aqueduct from the upper pool on the highway to the fuller's field, and say to him, take heed and be quiet. Do not fear or be faint-hearted, for these two stubs, talking about Syria and Israel, of smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and trouble it, and let us make a gap in its wall for ourselves, and set a king over them, the son of Tabal. Thus says the Lord God. So this is what God says about it here. It shall not stand, nor shall it come to pass, for the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin. Within 65 years, Ephraim will be broken, so that it will not be a people. The head of Ephraim is Samaria, and the head of Samaria is Remaliah's son, talking about Pekah here. If you will not believe, surely you shall not be established. So Ahaz is getting a chance, and God's telling him, God's really told all the kings all the way through and going all the way back. And even when the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt, he was always telling them, look, seek me. If you seek me, and he gave them example. He's wiping out everybody when they were seeking after God. Why would you fear? Why does your memory not remember what I've done for you? Going all the way back right here. Don't be afraid of these other kings and their armies coming after you. If you'll do what I want, they're nothing. They're two stubs of smoking firebrands. They're nothing. And their time's coming, and they're not going to exist very much longer. So why are you fearing them? You need to be fearing God. And so that's the problem here as we move a little bit forward, is Ahaz doesn't listen to the advice. He kind of sticks with his own mind and what he wants to do about it. So So that's kind of the background, what's going on. Syria and Israel are going to come down and want to wipe out Ahaz because he won't join their coalition. Let's see if there's anything else. So just, recall there that God said, I'm in control. We make that point in all these lessons right here. God has shown his control over man, over nature, over the universe, and all these different stories that ought to build up our confidence in God and not having fear for anybody else. So he tells Ahaz pretty much, if you're not going to believe, surely you shall not be established. So the opposite is, if you will believe, you will be established. But Ahaz can't get out of his own way. So instead of trusting and obeying God, he's not going to obey, and it's going to lead to the downfall of the southern kingdom. And as we're going to see in just a moment, it's going to lead to absolute devastation to the southern kingdom. So moving on a little bit in Isaiah there, in 7:11, Ahaz was invited to ask for a sign from God, and he's like, nah, I don't want to do that. And he's given a sign anyway. And so here we have which you already studied a lot in the last week in Isaiah, but you have this messianic prophecy right here saying, behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. That is God with us. Before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that you dread shall be forsaken by both their kings. So pretty much like we just made the point a minute ago, he's saying Israel and Syria are nothing, and they're going to come to nothing. But of course, God, we've been studying this whole quarter that God will even use evil kingdoms to punish his people when they turn their back on him. But he's telling them, you have in fear for these two countries, you're having fear for the wrong people, the wrong beings here. Your fear ought to be fear of God. So moving on a little bit later there in chapter 7, Ahaz is told the Lord will bring the king of Assyria upon you. And that's got to be a little bit, not overly confusing, but, he's in his immediate mind again thinking, I'm worried about Israel and Syria. They're already gathering across the border to come attack me and stuff. But God gives the prophecy right here that the Lord will bring the king of Assyria upon you and upon your father's house, there in verse 17. So all of this is based on evil and the evil of Ahaz and what he's doing. If he would have just sought after God, God would have taken care of all of his enemies. But what we see here, it's easy for us to say now, but what was happening over and over, kings did what they wanted to do. And once they didn't put their trust in God, they're going to be smacked down. All right, any comments about any of that before we move on? Okay, going back to 2 Kings chapter 16, if you'll flip back over there. We don't have much more to cover in there because most of the rest of the chapter there we'll talk about next week. So just a couple of verses really to cover here. Let's look at verses 5 and 6 real quick, chapter 16. Then Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to make war, and they besieged Ahaz, but could not overcome him. At that time, Rezin, king of Syria, captured Elath for Syria and drove the men of Judah from Elath. Then the Edomites went to Elath and dwelt there to this day. And some of your translations may say the Syrians there. But pretty much this is what we were saying before. This is kind of going a little bit along the early times of the battle right here. At first, they couldn't stand, they couldn't defeat Judah at the time because God didn't let it happen, right? But what you have and what Isaiah was explaining, Ahaz just not going to get out of his own way. He's going to keep being evil. So as we move forward, you're going to see them not having success against Judah is not going to last for very long because of Ahaz and his evil. I will make a quick note that city that was captured by Rezin is way down by the Red Sea. It's close to Ezion Geber, but it's right on the northern part of that little right rabbit ear of the Red Sea that's way down there. But it's, when we talked about Jeroboam II and Uzziah and all that and their borders being expanded, the southern kingdom had expanded and taken cities all the way down there where Elath is, but now they're losing it. Just as you start thinking about it, it's a shrinking country. not success, but failure, and not growth, but a reduction of land and stuff, all because of evil. This doesn't get to showing easy on Geber, but you can see this will just remind us a little bit when we start talking in just a moment. If you'll notice on the map, Philistia and Edom, right there, some of those countries will be brought up just a moment when we're talking about there. And Aram up there talking about Syria. If you just picture in your mind what Judah has on all sides of it, starting to press them down. You got the northern kingdom, you got Syria coming down from the northeast, you got Edom from the south east there, and Philistia coming from the south and the west. You know, you do evil, what God's been prophesying all this time is you're about to be smacked down, and you're about to get it from all sides. All right, so battles continue, but now they start to turn bad. At first, we just said they couldn't do anything with them, but flip back over to 2 Chronicles 28. Let's read a few verses there real quick. Verses 5 through 9. Therefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hand of the king of Syria because of all this idol worship Ahaz was doing in his refusal to obey. But it says he's been delivered into the king of Syria. They defeated him and carried away a great multitude as captives and brought them to Damascus. Then he was also delivered into the hand of the king of Israel, who defeated him with a great slaughter. For Pekah the son of Remaliah killed 120,000 in Judah in one day, all valiant men, because they had forsaken the Lord God and their fathers. Zikri, a mighty man of Ephraim up north, killed Maaseiah, the king's son, Azrikam, the officer over the house, and Elkanah, who was second to the king. And the children of Israel carried away captive their brethren, 200,000 women, sons, and daughters. And they also took away much spoil from them and brought the spoil ago to Samaria. So just think about those numbers real quick. 120,000 valiant men wiped out in a day. 200,000 women, children, and others taken captive and taken out of the land right there. It's a heavy defeat. And that's because you have in Judah a Baal worshiper and a worshiper of other gods, Molech, and all this other evil stuff that God had driven out of the land. So now everything is turning very bad for Judah. So, why did this happen? Verse 6, because they had forsaken the Lord God of their fathers. So that's what happens. God will bless those that are seeking after him, but those that are turning their backs, they lose all protection. All right, a few more verses, verses 9 through 11. So now you get into, let me see for time, I'm going to, hopefully you were able to read some of this at home, so we'll just kind of jump through it right now. But as you get through 9 through 11 right now, and this happens, so you had the 120,000 killed and the 200,000 led up across the border over towards Samaria. And this prophet Oded comes up to Israel or Ephraim there and lets them know that God was angry. Now, God allowed them to come down and war with them because of Ahaz's evil. But the way they dealt with what they did and the capturing their own brethren, if you go back and study how God felt about making slaves of his own people, he was not going to be okay with that. And so they're about to get wiped out. And God says, you better stop. So he has this prophet up there that pretty much tells him that God's angry with them because you've killed in a rage that reaches to heaven. Verses 9. So part of it was approved by God, the going down there and battling stuff, but the level they took it to wasn't approved by God at all. And so now they're pretty much telling them, by you trying to make slaves of your own brethren, are you not guilty before God? Also there in verse 10, their great hypocrisy. And they're told in verse 11, return the captives, for the fierce wrath of the Lord is upon you. So that's what this prophet's telling there. And then moving down through 12 through 15, some smart people, some people that decide, we're about to get wiped out. Now we're definitely against God right now. So some smart people there stops the soldiers and stuff, and pretty much they say there our guilt is great and there's fierce wrath against us down there in verse 13. They had told the army also that you're not bringing the captives here. It's not right. We're not making slaves of our brethren. And then as you can see at the bottom part of the slide there, verses 14 and 15, the captives were left with the leaders who returned the spoils. So they give everything back to them. And so all these 200,000, they clothe them, they feed them, they anoint them. They give the feeble donkeys to ride on, and they take them back to Jericho. Very smart move from what we're studying here, because had they not done that, it looks like, they'd have been wiped out, and God would have taken a heavy toll on the northern kingdom at that time. So then I told you to remember that map, because Edom there on the southeast and the Philistia over there going on from the west, they're taking advantage at this same time because the evil going on and God not protecting them. The Edomites attacked Judah and took captives away. The Philistines coming from the west, moving to the east, took lowlands of the south of Judah and took several cities. So you have all this just absolute chaos going on because of their evil leadership, number one. But don't forget, the people are absolutely morally corrupt at this time too. So because of all this, Tiglath-Pileser came to Ahaz and distressed him also. So now you're adding the biggest power in the whole region at the time. Now they're also coming in there. So, they're getting it from all sides. So remember, why is all this happening? It's because Ahaz encouraged moral decline and because he was continually unfaithful to the Lord. Even though he had Isaiah and others trying to tell him to do right, he wouldn't do it. So just think, all of this, every direction, just totally pounding on Judah at this time because of their evil. Okay, so now we got a major mistake where Ahaz, instead of going to God again, decides to ask help from Tiglath-Pileser. So flipping back to 2 Kings and a couple of verses there real quick, 16, 7 through 9, and that'll complete as far as we're going with 16 today. Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I'm your servant and your son. Come up and save me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of the king of Israel, and rise up against me. And Ahaz took silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it as a present to the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria heeded, think about that word, heeded him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus and took it and carried away its people and killed Rezin. So because he sought him, I guess, there is going to be something that Judah liked here, and that's going to be the killing of Assyria's king Rezin. But I want you to be thinking about Assyria. They could care the less about upholding Judah. They want to wipe Judah out as well. That's what you got to keep in your mind as we're moving forward. He could care the less about helping them. But in this example right here, why not take money, take all this other stuff from Judah right now, and you come back and smack them at a more opportune time. And right now you go ahead and do what you want to do anyway, which is getting rid of Syria. So that's kind of what's going on there with the relationship between Ahaz and Pul, or Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria. So in 2 Chronicles 28, we won't turn over there. You can look or follow along if you like, but pretty much what we just said is told there too. Ahaz took silver and gold from the Lord's house, and they sent it to the king of Assyria. But however, Tiglath-Pileser is going to come and distress Judah, because that's what he wants to do. Again, he cares less about helping them or assisting them. He's trying to have a conquest and take over the whole region. He just took out Syria because it, served its purpose at the time. So did Tiglath-Pileser help Ahaz or not? There's a yes or no between 2 Kings and that. Again, he did what he wanted to do. He took out Syria, which helped Judah for a little bit up there, but he wanted to do it anyway. And then he came down and distressed Judah because that's what he wanted to do, because he's wanting to wipe them out. And we'll get into that in Hezekiah. And just real quick, in Isaiah 9, 1 through 2, there will be no more gloom for her who was in anguish. In earlier times, he treated the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali with contempt, but later on, he shall make it glorious by the way of the sea on the other side of Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. And that also reference to Matthew chapter 4 there. These verses are going to be quoted right there, because this is Isaiah giving a glimpse of hope. We've been seeing that in a lot of the prophets. There's a glimpse of hope for those that are going to seek after God. And here's a messianic prophecy again here talking about Jesus being the light, and Jesus going to be a comfort to those that seek after him. So I won't read this slide either based on time, but pretty much that exact thing we just read in Isaiah is quoted when Jesus begins his ministry there in Matthew chapter 4, where Jesus quotes this right here. And it says that this was to fill what was spoken through Isaiah the prophet. So you got that messianic prophecy there. And hopefully we did a good job when we were going around kind of saying, how does this affect us and what are the lessons for us to this day? I appreciate your attention. There's no class Wednesday night because of singing night. There actually won't be a Wednesday class for about 3 weeks because our gospel meets the next week. But we'll continue this in chapter 16 next Sunday. And then, so the next 2 classes will be Sunday classes because of singing night and the gospel meeting. But thanks for your attention.